It is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Senate Appropriations Chair Jack Latvala and House Speaker Richard Corcoran. Senator Latvala represents parts of Pasco and Pinellas Counties and has been a Florida resident for almost 50 years. He is one of the few Floridians who has served in the state Senate on separate occasions with nearly 2 decades of public service under his belt. A small business owner, Senator Latvala currently serves as chair of the General Appropriations and alternate chair of the Joint Legislative Budget Commission. He also serves on the Rules, Commerce, and Tourism and the Environmental Preservation and Conservation Committees. Speaker Corcoran represents Central Pasco County. There's a lot of magic in Pasco County, gentlemen. Having moved here when he was 11, as Speaker, he has promised to make the Florida House the most open and accountable legislature in the entire country. In addition to increased accountability and transparency, the House's priorities include taking on budget spending and overregulation, as well as making tax cuts and increasing federal flexibility in healthcare and education. With 2 speakers today, Senator Latvala will take the stage first, followed by Speaker Corcoran. Each will be given 10 minutes, at which point we will turn it over to our students and the audience for Q&A. During Senator Latvala's speech, we will ask that Speaker Corcoran please remain seated, and vice versa. However, during Q&A, we'd like both of you to stand at our respective podiums to facilitate the answer of questions. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Jack Latvala and House Speaker Richard Corcoran.
Thank you very much, Michelle. When I thought I had a nice set of remarks put together, and when I got up to the table up here, Speaker Corcoran says, "I just want you to know that the first 5 minutes of my speech, I'm saying good things about you." So I've had to do some hasty editing, but I want him to know he's on the honor system. But I did bring something that I thought maybe that Speaker could use. And I want to present those. I want to present those to the Speaker because he has I've been up there 22 years, and he has picked more fights with more people than anybody I've ever seen before. So some of them justified, you know. Sometimes when you're getting the sacred cows or turning over the garbage cans, things happen. And he's certainly been doing a lot of that. And so he needs those gloves. I haven't given the governor his pair yet, but I'm sure I'll run into him later in the week. I want to acknowledge my colleagues that represent you here in Palm Beach County that are here today, Senator Rader and Senator Powell. I don't see my buddy Senator Clemens. Guess he didn't get the word I was coming to town. I'm sure that's the only reason he's not here. But also my former colleagues, Senator Sachs and Senator Bogdanoff, we miss you. We miss you guys a lot up there, and we've got 20 new members of the Senate, and it's a little bit different place. That's all. I'll just let that go at that. You know, there's a lot of similarities between me and the Speaker. We're both from the same area of the state, as she mentioned. We're also both from working families. There are no trust funds between us. We got where we are today by ourselves, on our own. And we both started as political consultants. A lot of people don't know that, but we both started out in the political direct mail business and so forth. And then we diverged a little bit, and the Speaker became first I guess a government employee and working for Speaker Rubio as his chief of staff, and now he works as a lawyer for one of our large statewide law firms. And I went the other route, went into business, built a large political direct mail company, and now I have a very small printing company that gets smaller every day that I spend in Tallahassee. But he and I, we stand at sort of different ends of the spectrum with regard to some of the issues that we have to deal with this year. The primary one, of course, being economic development, and that's the one that has gotten the most attention. Speaker Corcoran is very much a low-tax, small government kind of Republican, and I like to think I'm the same way. But I also know that we have a lot of needs in our state, some of which maybe we're not meeting as well as we could. You know, we have to have roads, and every time I come to South Florida and try to go down I-95, either in the morning or the afternoon, maybe late at night's okay, but in the morning or the afternoon, I realize some of the needs that we have for infrastructure in our state. And right now, Florida's 49th in the nation in terms of spending per lane mile for our road system. We have needs to educate our children. We have needs to help out the 19,000 or so developmentally disabled people who are on our waiting list at any given time for services from the state. And we have some needs to help treat our mentally ill. Right now, Florida is number 50, yes, number 50 in America for the per capita spending for mental health. The state that I spend a lot of time in the summer, Maine, spends 10 times more per capita on mental health than we do here in Florida. Now, I agree with him that we shouldn't raise taxes to try to meet any of those needs, but I think that the best way to meet those needs is organically, by growing our economy. So how do we do that? Well, I believe that we try to do that by, number one, taking our best industry, our best part of our economy, and trying to make the most out of it, which is our tourism economy. You know, unfortunately, and they backed off somewhat, but unfortunately the House proposed to actually do away with Visit Florida, to fold it back into a state agency. And I think that would be disastrous, and hopefully we'll work that out and make sure that that doesn't happen. You know, here in Florida, we went from 82 million tourists a year on a pretty regular basis to 112 million last year by spending a little more money on advertising. And our own economist, our own state economist, who's appointed by both the Senate and the House, did a study and showed us that the return on investment on the tourism dollars we spend is 3.2 to 1. That means $3.20 for every dollar that we spend on Visit Florida advertising. And those are tax dollars, direct tax dollars. So if we're not spending them on Visit Florida and we don't have some of that income, then where are we going to make up those tax dollars? It's going to be from Floridians, from you and me. You know, in addition to that, tourism is responsible for 1.4 million jobs in Florida. 90,000 in my county, I think roughly the same in Palm Beach County. And that's a lot of folks who need to provide for their families and work in our tourism industry. Tourism as a whole generates $11.3 billion a year in state and local tax revenue in Florida. The governor's proposal for Visit Florida funding is 0.5, half of 1% of the money that's generated in total tax revenue by tourists in Florida. And I think that's a good investment. You know, I have to say this, and you know, we can disagree on issues and not disagree personally, and that's what I try to do. And I've been there a long time, and we try not to get personal with our debates. And you know, unfortunately, I think this debate may have gotten a little too personal, but it's not personal here today. But I must say that what we're having, what we're considering on the Visit Florida question is the question of whether we should change our proven successful ways of tourism and hope that the tourists come. Well, change and hope are words we've heard a lot over the last 8 or 10 years. And, you know, how did that work out? That's all I'll say about that. Enterprise Florida, the other side of the coin. This used to be a state department called the Department of Commerce. When I was fortunate enough to serve in the Florida Senate back in the 90s, we made it into Enterprise Florida as a public-private partnership to work on business development. Now, there's some criticism that maybe there's not enough private contribution. But I can tell you, when it was a state department, it was all state employees running it, bureaucrats running it, and there was no private contribution. So whatever has been achieved in that effort to make it a public-private partnership is an improvement over how it used to be done. Now, there was an unfortunate video that went out last week that criticized the Enterprise Florida for a couple things. Number one, it criticized them for digital domain. Now, I'm sure there's people in this room that know that whole story because, as I recall, when I started coming to Palm Beach a few years ago, there was a sign down the street here, maybe even almost in front of this, that had the words digital domain on it. And those of you that were around a while will remember that digital domain came from the Florida legislature, specifically pushed by a member of the House who's no longer there, who ended up on the board of digital domain, by the way, and it was recommended against by Enterprise Florida. They turned it down, and the legislature made them do it anyway. Likewise, Burnham. Burnham's a lot like Scripps. It's up in Orlando. It was not an Enterprise Florida creation. It was thought up and brought to Florida by former Governor Jeb Bush and the legislative leaders at the time that was passed. They put the money in the budget, they gave it to Enterprise Florida, and they said, go make good with this. It wasn't developed as an Enterprise Florida project. Here in Palm Beach County, you have who is acknowledged as the best economic development person in the whole state of Florida in Kelly Smallridge. And I swear it's an accident that she's right in front of me gazing up at me when I say that. But it's a nice sight, I will say that too. Since 2010, 95,000 jobs have been created here in Palm Beach County. 5,000 of them and over have been created with the direct involvement of Enterprise Florida. You know, incentives are a bad word to some people. To me, incentives are the same thing as having a sale in a retail business or having an early bird special in a restaurant. They're things to try to get attention, to try to bring them in. And is it 10 minutes already? Okay. Well, I'm going to tell one final story, and then I'm going to stop. Incentives are to bring people into a facility. And nationally, there's $80 billion a year in incentives paid by local and state government. We don't have those in Florida anymore now. Last year, there was a company called Gammo Outdoor in Fort Lauderdale who purchased the Daisy Outdoor Company, which makes the Red Ryder BB gun. And that's the same gun that was in the movie The Christmas Story. And it was the gun that little Ralphie wanted. Well, our Florida company purchased a company that was in Arkansas, and Arkansas started loading up the incentives to get the Florida company to move up to Arkansas. And guess what? A month ago, it was announced that that company and the BB guns are all going to be up in Arkansas. Now, to me, that's just like the saying in the movie about getting shot in the eyes. I'm tired of Florida getting shot in the eyes on economic development, and I stand with the governor, and most of us in the Senate stand with the governor to try to make sure that that doesn't happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I have to start really, as Senator Latvala said, an attractive lady sitting in the front, and she was staring at me, and I was thinking, man, I still got it. and now I realize who she is, and that she was staring me down. I did talk to Jack beforehand, and he said to me, you think about this. You're the Speaker of the House. I'm the Appropriations Chair. Both of us speaking before just a massive audience at the Forum Club. He said to me, Richard, did you ever think in your wildest dreams that you and I would be here? And I said, Senator, I got to be honest with you. You've never been in any of my wildest dreams. I do want to say, as a sports fan, I can tell you, whether it's basketball or football, name any sport, talk to any head coach, there's always that one player that you got on. I stayed up last night because I got in late, and the 30 for 30 on the NC State basketball team was on, and they were talking about NC State playing Houston at the championship game, and all the players were saying, it's that one guy, and it was Olajuwon. We had to stop Olajuwon. You talk to football coaches, and we got to neutralize Tom Brady. And I can tell you as a House member, being there for 6 years, that whatever strategy you come up with, whatever big, bold idea you think would be great and transformative for the state of Florida, you have to always have a Jack Latvala strategy. It's a real testimony to his skill and capability and how he's served in that Senate for now 2 separate occasions with just tremendous aplomb. And honestly, Senator, it's an honor to call you a friend, but even greater adversary. You're a difficult, very successful individual. He talks about how we both started opening a consulting company. He's very generous. He had a huge consulting company. I started a little one, and I got like 3 or 4 clients, and all of a sudden I get this telephone call from a number that I didn't recognize. And so I answered it, and I got a little bit at the beginning, said something about Jack Latvala, and then it was just literally like a 5-minute diatribe at the top of his lungs telling me that what was I doing, trying to take his business and everything else. And I hung up the phone, and the person in the car next to me said, who was that? And I said, I'm not sure, but he was angry. I want to start real fast because Jack Latvala started with that point. And I'll tell you, I grew up with 2 parents. They were older. They both served in World War II, and they both lived through the Great Depression. So in our house, the understanding of government and its role in your lives and how bad government destroys communities, towns, individuals, and whole nations was huge in our lives. Neither one of my parents, for the most part, during their formative years, had parents. My dad grew up in an orphanage. My mom grew up in boarding schools because her parents were in India trying to make ends meet. And they taught me something, and all my siblings, one great thing that we all have in common in this room today, and that is none of us did anything to be born in this country. It was an act of grace upon us. And that act of grace upon us should allow us at all times to be able to have a civil, robust, passionate debate about the issues. But it should never be personal. And if it gets to that point, then we as a state, we as a nation lose. And I do think that right now in the debates that we have on politics, state and nationally, they're too filled with vitriol and anger. And the reality is that words matter. Whoever said that sticks and stones break my bones, but words will never hurt me was an idiot. Words destroy, and they're hurtful. And I'll tell you, whatever that debate is for the next, 15 months, we'll fight for it passionately, but we'll do our best to maintain a civil and open and transparent and polite discourse that's worthy of the people that we represent. Having said that, let me get into a couple issues. First, I want to say that I think that it's a strange world in Tallahassee. It really is. So I start looking into issues with my colleagues, and we look into what's been going on over the past several years, and I'll start with Enterprise Florida. And when you dig into it, you find out that 18 of the 26 programs are failing, that 70% of them are losers for the taxpayers, that basically the majority of them go to companies with 1,000 employees or more, when the reality is that the job market and the growth in our economy has been fueled by the 98% of small businesses who account for 70% of the job growth. And they get, in essence, nothing. And so we said, in a room, strategizing, okay, here's the deal to our leadership. I think this is a winning issue. And this is right for the people of the state of Florida. The problem is we're going to have trouble getting the Democrats to go along with us because it's basically welfare for corporations. And they generally don't like it when we start talking about taking people off of welfare or putting work programs in place. The reality is that every single Democrat, for the most part, maybe I've left some out, last year when we zeroed out corporate welfare, voted with us. And our own opposition is coming from our own party who, for historical purposes, has said that welfare to able-bodied individuals isn't right, and we believe it's not right to able-bodied corporations who are successful. The other reality is that prior to Enterprise Florida existing, we had the Department of Commerce. It was shut down. We created this public-private partnership. And what I will tell you, for the most part, there's nothing private about Enterprise Florida. Almost nothing private about Enterprise Florida. They're out there dealing in the darkness with little transparency until we shined a spotlight on them. And when we shined a spotlight on them, we found bonuses and severance packages and furniture, trips. When we shined a spotlight on them, we found all of the criteria and the records and the historical rates of failure. The same economist that Senator Latvala quoted is the same economist who said these stats that I've given you, that it's been, in essence, an abject failure. And that money that we give to them, which is in essence, now we have two public agencies. We have the Department of Economic Opportunity and we have Enterprise Florida, but we call that one a public-private partnership, and they don't work under the same transparency as DEO does. So our whole point was, let's take that which is in Enterprise Florida. I said 18 of 26. Let's take those things that are working in Enterprise Florida, create one agency, have it be completely transparent and accountable, and make it work for the taxpayers, and take the savings from that money and put it in the things that really do drive business here. I don't know, there's probably a site selector here. They'll tell you. Every site selector I've ever spoken with, they'll tell you that incentives are low on the charts. The highest things are education, infrastructure, your criminal justice system, your tax policy, your regulatory policy, the quality of life, things that really matter. All incentives do is an icing on the cake, and a perfect example is Hertz. They were literally in a bidding war between us and Oklahoma. Oklahoma offered them something like $60 million in incentives. We gave them just under 20, and yet they came to Florida. So a corporation can walk away from $40 million in incentives, and that's prudent to their board of directors? No, they didn't want to be in Oklahoma. They wanted to be in Florida. And guess where the CEO was retiring and lives right before they moved? Naples. Shocker. Another reason companies move here is because their CEOs want to be here. So we moved down that path and we said no to Enterprise Florida with our Democrats in tow. The second thing we did is we said let's open up the entire legislative practice and make it transparent and accountable. So we took pork barrel spending in the budget. Everyone's outraged by pork barrel spending all the time. And so we said, let's just take that, which you keep in mind is 0.05% of our budget. And we said, from now on, if you want pork barrel spending, you've got to fill out and tell us why it's worthy of taxpayer expenditures. Basic questions aren't even required today. Do you know how many times I've been out on Adams Street, which is the street right outside of the Capitol, and someone, as an appropriations chairman, would come and hand me something on a napkin, a cue card, a Post-it sticky, and it just says, line item, an amount of money, and the name of the project. It says, hey, if you could get this in the budget, that would be great. And if you don't think millions upon millions of dollars are put in our state budget that way, I'm here to tell you it's true. And so we said, let's change that process. And if it's pork barrel spending that we're talking about, not only should you be accountable for what's in there and put your name on it and own it, go out to a people of 700 and people say, yes, that project is mine and this is why I support it. But you should also make it non-recurring. If it's pork barrel spending, they should come back year after year after year and justify their existence to the taxpayers. Again, every single Democrat supported us in that measure. Our opposition are Republicans. I tell my wife all the time, I'm convinced at some point Alan Funt's going to come out from candid camera and tell me, hey, we've just been playing a game on you. It's really not this kind of a world. But that's the opposition we have. And so what we're trying to do in a short period of time is clean up government and make it more accountable. Same with Visit Florida. Let me tell you just general facts about Visit Florida. First of all, the agency didn't exist until 1996. Do you know what we never had one of up until 1996? Not one single visitor. Nobody was coming to Florida prior to that agency. We were a vast wasteland. And then we have Visit Florida, and historically it gets 25, 20, 20, 15, $20 million. And then all of a sudden, the last literally 4 years, it jumps and goes up to basically almost 200%. Education funding didn't go up 200%, and we still have failure factories in the state. Infrastructure didn't go 200%, and we still stuck in traffic, all of us, every day. And so you look at it, and you say, okay, if you believe that's a proper role of government, if you believe that is a good expenditure with a limited and finite set of budgets, let's look at the facts. We always say philosophy happens with or without you. If you have a philosophy, it's going to happen. And if facts matter. So let's look at the facts. Can we make decisions? Can we have arguments on the facts? I can tell you on these two fights, I've been called and told that the House members, we hate beaches, we hate hotels, we hate our neighbor and don't care if he has a job, we hate jobs in general. These are all the things. You know, honestly, could I buy a fact, please? Can I buy one stinking fact? Because here are the facts. When we've increased funding to Visit Florida in 4 through 8, give or take, some of those years, tourism went down. When we cut it in 3 and 9, tourism went up. So could someone, and to Jack's point, our economist says that it's 3-to-1 return on investment, even if you believe that's a good investment. So really, if that's what it is, if that's the key to Visit Florida, then why don't we prudently decide to take $10 billion of our money, put it into tourism so that we get 30 back, and then we can fund all of the education and transportation needs? It doesn't make sense. And so there's studies out there that say that our actual return on investment is 2 cents. So we're just saying, can we look at it? And when we look at it, what we have found is $1 million for a wrapper, $2 million to wrap a race car, another $1 million for a B soccer league, just wasted money. So if we had to go up to $85 million and everyone says that's wasted, let's just add up the waste so far and work it backwards and not do the full amount. If you say that pit bull is a waste of money, well, that's $1 million less you need. If you say $2 million on a race car, that's $2 million less you need. But we don't even do that. Government just keeps spending and spending, and we're not spending on the things that will change your lives, your grandchildren's lives, and your family's lives. The things that really matter. And as long as we have breath, as long as we have 15 more months, we will fight for what is true and just in this state, regardless who's opposed to us. I don't care about party. I don't care if it's a special interest. I don't care if it's the status quo. None of us care. We will fight for what is true and just. Thank you very much.
Does it work? Okay. Yes, gentlemen, if you'll return to your podiums without the boxing gloves. First of all, thank you both. And as promised, our first question will come from students. The first question from Dreyfus School of the Arts. While we're making our way to the table, I forgot to mention that President Kelly is here from Florida Atlantic University. Thank you for being here, President Kelly. And also Judge Minu Sasser, Judge Glenn Kelly, Judge Ed Artau, and Judge Janice Kaiser. Thank you for being here, judges. Well. And go ahead with the first question.
So a lot of the debate right now has been focused about the current strengths in Florida. But what do you think the next 50 years will hold for Florida's future and economy?
I didn't hear it.
Can you repeat the question?
So a lot of the current debate has been focused around current strengths in Florida, like tourism or new businesses. But what do you think the next 50 years will hold for Florida and its economy?
Yeah, go ahead, Speaker Corcoran, if you go first.
This is what I believe in. I believe in something that's been true for thousands of years, for the most part. Nobody, no country, no group of poor people, no industry has been lifted up greater in the last, whatever, 2,000 years than in the last 300 at the advent of a real, true free market system. More people have been lifted out of poverty. More people have been able to thrive and start a business. And so what the role of government is, that's the question. That's a philosophy. The great philosophers of all time, starting from Adam Smith, and then you go to modern guys, to Locke, to Burke, to Hobbes, to Sowell, to Friedman, all of them believed that in a free market is when you allow the individual to rise up and thrive. And what I am telling you, if we as a government stay out of these businesses, deregulate where we shouldn't be regulating, think about it. A great mind, sorry. Shouldn't try to use big words. Should have corrected me, Jack. A great mind, no, he comes up with this idea. Why? Why do I take my family and I'm in New York and Boston and I got to get into a dirty vehicle that doesn't even feel safe and the seats are torn and I feel like I get ripped off? So some guy says, I got an idea, and he builds a brilliant company he didn't even need his own capital. He came up with a concept, use your own car, I'll hire you, and you can go out and you can give rides that are cleaner, faster, safer from an app right on your phone. And guess who's in the way? Government. Government saying no, 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 because we protect the status quo, because we fight and write in statute laws that protect businesses' profits, that eliminate their competition. If we eliminate that, yes, all those great minds will come here. And if we build a world-class educational system, as we have a university president here, they'll come here. But we're robbing those dollars when we engage in that kind of business from the universities and from a free market sector that will allow that growth to come.
You know, traditionally, our economy in Florida has been a three-legged stool. It's been agriculture, tourism, and home building. When we get into a recessionary period or when we have circumstances come along like 9/11, then one or more of those legs falls out from under us. Agriculture has had some very painful years in a row due to some of the new diseases and so forth, some of the tariffs, changing trade agreements and so forth that we can't control here in Florida. So we've had some visionary leaders who have tried to figure out ways to bring in new, clean, light industries like biotech. You know, they don't have smokestacks. They don't spew metals out into the atmosphere. They're clean industries. And, you know, in the first decade of the 2000s, that's where Burnham came from. That's where Scripps came from. That's where Max Planck came from. With trying to find new things to bring to Florida that might create a research hub or that might spin off new businesses. Now, unfortunately, some of those haven't worked as well as others. But that doesn't, in my mind, mean that we throw out the baby with the bathwater and quit trying.
Thank you, gentlemen. And the next question from Wellington High School.
Senator Latvala, as a small business owner and legislator, what is your opinion on President Trump's business holdings while holding national political office, and what advice would you give the president, and what do you believe is the best manner in which Mr. Trump can resolve this issue?
Who was that question for? Well, you know, one of my solutions to my problem might be to turn my business interests over to the you know, what he's going to find is the same thing I've found, and the same thing everyone who's in the governmental process finds, is what a sacrifice it is to your personal income, to your personal business to be in government. One of those sacrifices is that here in Florida we have to file complete financial disclosure, lets everyone know how much we make every day, every year in income, how many shares of stock and which companies we own and so forth. Long time ago, I made the decision that, the public service was worth it, and I've made that sacrifice. But I stopped making money a long time ago. And I think that the president is going to find out the same thing. It's going to be very hard. People are going to take out on his business, just as they are on some of his children's businesses, their personal beliefs. I mean, this whole situation, I had a reporter ask me last week, did I consider the press the enemy of the people? And as a general rule, I don't. But I can tell you one thing. I have been around the political process in Florida for 44 years. That's a lot of presidential elections, 11 of them to be exact. And I don't ever remember a time when the press didn't give a new president some sort of honeymoon. And say what you want about the guy, and I don't agree with a lot of what he does, but this constant carping every single day is just not fair. And that's just the way I feel about it.
I think it's a great question, and I think that public office is a public trust, and what we do is a great honor. And when you start thinking that the office that you hold is somehow less important than you or the person that holds it, you end up with cracks in the fabric of society. I think he ought to release his tax returns, and I think he ought to comply with the law when it comes to his holdings.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, students, for your questions. The first question we have for you: the growth in sober homes in residential neighborhoods has been a difficult issue for our local governments. Are there plans at the state level to tighten regulations and protect our home values? Speaker Corcoran, you want to go first?
Well, first, I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Representative Hager, Representative Harrell, who I've worked with closely on the sober homes. We made a dent in them. It took us a couple of years. We made a dent to them last time, but there's still a problem. And yeah, there is plans to try to figure out a way to correct that problem and find a way without abridging people's property rights, but to make sure that, that everyone's property rights collectively are protected.
I've supported the efforts, particularly of Senator Clemens in the Senate, on that issue for the last 2 or 3 years in a row. We keep, making a little progress every year. I think that some of the major impediments to that, as I understand it, are some of the federal requirements and some of the federal restrictions, with the Americans for Disabilities Act and so forth, and that kind of limits local communities and what they can do. But I'm certainly willing to support whatever local folks come up with that we find that is constitutional to try to do.
Thank you, gentlemen. Let's talk about education. The state is ranked 29th in the nation, earning a C ranking. We have made progress. For example, we're first in the nation in the equity portion of our school spending, yet 44th on spending per pupil. What are your plans to make schools better in Florida and more competitive? Senator Latvala, you want to go first this time?
Well, I think we have to continue the progress that we've made and continue the steps that we've taken in the legislature. A teacher pay, for one thing, I think is very important. I think we need to reward. We all remember, even as long ago as it was as I was in public school, there's certain teachers that still stand out in my mind as having a major impact on my life. And we need to find out a way to reward those teachers, and maybe, not at the same scale that some of the others that are just putting in their 7 hours a day. I know we're going to have some legislation on that. My son was appointed by the Speaker as the chairman of that committee. He won't tell me too much about what they're planning on doing, but he told me that they have some exciting plans in the House to kind of shake things up with regard to public education. So, I would suspect that the major innovative ideas on that for this session are going to come out of the House.
I will say that I thought by appointing his son as a chairman, he might be able to get him on a vote on enterprise. It's not working out so well. Until Chris's job's in jeopardy.
He loves you, Speaker. He really does.
He's a great kid. I want to say real fast on education. It'll be the #1 priority out of the House. Absolutely will be. And I'll walk you through. So in Florida, think about this. We're the richest country in the history of mankind, and we're the 3rd largest state in that richest country. And we still have throughout our state failure factories, which are literally handing over diplomas to individuals who are, in essence, functionally illiterate. How is that even possible? And if that's not the height of cruelty, the height of wrongness, I don't know what is. And so here's the reality. There's innovators in that free market space I told you about that have gone out around the country and have started public schools for low-income youths. These public schools, and you can just look at them, KIPP, SEED, Uncommon, IDEA, all over the nation. They have 100% graduation rates. Their student body is basically 100% below poverty level. Most of them from single-parent families, most of them minority. They have 100% graduation levels and 100% go on to college. And you say, how? Okay, so that model exists. Well, why isn't it in Florida? We only have 2 of those types of schools in the state of Florida. One is in Jacksonville and one is in Miami. And the only reason they're there is because of the benevolence and compassion of millionaires and billionaires. How is that not the #1 function we should be doing in the state? How in the world do we not draw down and have one of those great schools on every single street corner in every single low-income neighborhood where we can guarantee that that child, not only does he get an education is so much more than getting a job. An education goes to the dignity of man. Why, when countries are taken over by dictators, what's the first thing they do? One of the first things they do is burn books. Because an education is what creates a great citizen and a great fabric of a society and a country. And when we rob that child of that education, they can never get it back. And so we will spend whatever it takes. Our plan is hundreds of millions of dollars to create a regulatory environment where these folks can come down because their models are different. How can you take the same formula spending and give it to one school that has teachers that come from 8 to 4 and give the exact same amount of money to these types of schools? Some of them are boarding schools. Some of them educate 6 days a week from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And we're going to give them the same amount of money. They can't open. They can't even begin. And yet we have failure factories in our state. It just makes no sense whatsoever. It is absolutely something that needs to get fixed. The thought that you can be in this country at this time and not get a world-class education regardless of your background is unacceptable.
This question is for Speaker Corcoran. You have been reluctant to support tougher texting and driving laws. Why?
First, I want to say, I know before I answer that question, which I get that quite a bit, first I want to say that I grew up in an Irish Catholic family with 5 kids, and so I know when I talk sometimes, I talk a little passionately. I just want you guys to know if I talk like that, I'm not angry. It's just how I grew up talking. When I was campaigning door to door, I went to this elderly, I have an elderly district, and I went to an elderly guy's door, and he's about 80 years old, and so I handed him the brochure, and it's got my wife, and I have 6 children. And so I gave it to him, and we started talking, and we started getting into discussion and about something, and I was talking passionately, and he's literally in his 80s, and I could see him start walking backwards, And I said, sir, I'm not a threat. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just very passionate. This is kind of how I talk. And he looked at me, and when you're that age, you can say anything. He looks at my brochure, and he says, son, I see the brochure with the 6 kids. I get that you're passionate. And so when I answer these questions, please don't take it as anything, just passion. But on texting and driving, that's another good example. And so I get this asked a lot, and this is what I would tell you. And what we have now is a unique situation. We made it a secondary offense a couple of years ago. Now the question is, do we make it a primary offense? And I've seen a lot of times in the legislature, and any of us who've driven down the road, it's a problem. And the question is, how do you have that enforcement mechanism work and really get the results you want? And so what we're doing is we're pulling the data because we have 40 other states that have gone to some sort of primary offense. And looking at that data and making a determination, how do they enforce it by protecting people's rights? And at the same time, is it decreasing and having the effect? And there's diverse studies out there that suggest that. And what we ought to do is allow our law enforcement, whether it's under our current laws of careless driving, and does that include distracted driving, have that enforcement mechanism. But until we know the data, and we've lived this, you guys have had it in your community. We were promised and sold a bill of goods. Why would you not be for red light cameras? It saves lives. And it sounds good. Intuitively, you're there. And then all of a sudden, you pass a law that has red light cameras. People's rights are clearly being violated. Cities and counties are clearly cheating. They're fiddling with the time of the red light, the amber lights. They're using it for revenue. It was not about saving lives. And then the statistics that they're misleading us with come out, and you're more in danger. The very purpose of why we allegedly did it, to save lives, now has our families in greater dangers, not less. It's pretty universally known. And so to the same extent with distracted driving or texting while driving, it's a problem and it needs to get fixed. The question is, we have to go about it based on facts. And we ought to get that data and make those decisions instead of acting irrationally and getting in a situation like we did with red light cameras.
Thank you. Senator Latvala, we have several questions here, as you might imagine, about Senate President Negron's priority to buy land south of the lake. Can you comment on the Senate's plan and also particularly how the federal government will come into play as for their portion and potentially buying land north of the lake?
Well, I hope that there's no one here or no one involved in the process who doesn't agree that there's a problem that needs to be solved. Certainly, if you lived on the water in Martin County or if you made your living on the water in Martin County as a fishing guide or a marina owner or owned vacation cottages. I saw somebody here today that owns vacation cottages on the water. Or the same over in Fort Myers and Sanibel. If you had to go through those discharges and what that did to that community, you would be up in arms about it. And I think we've got to find a way of stopping it. Now that said, that there's obviously different ideas about how we can stop it. President Negron came up with a plan for 2 large reservoirs south of the lake, along with trying to support some of the other projects that are already underway. Others have come up with an idea that maybe the way to do it is to spend state money to raise the dike around the lake. The feds have been pretty slow about coming up with the money to do that. If we raise the dike or repair the dike, it eliminates the flood risk. Mayor Wilson from Belglade, I saw him here, and that's one of the highest risks for flood of any dike in the country was right up next to that dike that broke in California. So, there's a possibility of doing that. And then there's others that have suggested that, maybe we should do some of the storage north of the lake as well. I think that the answer lies in a combination of all of those. And hopefully in the next several weeks, we'll be able to work together collectively with our partners in the House, with the governor's office, to try to figure out a way to work where we can solve the problem. None of us want to put people out of work. And unfortunately, I think that's one of the consequences of the reservoirs south of the lake and taking land out of production. So if we can find a solution to the problem that doesn't put a lot of people out of work, that has the same merit as a solution, then we're all for it. I want to say, though, that our Senate President is very committed to this, to solving this problem. He's had a significant amount of personal sacrifice, professional sacrifice, because of his efforts on this, and he has stood firm, and I am standing firm behind him to make sure it happens.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions, gentlemen. We want to get you. According to Palm Beach County Department of Health, when Florida did not expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, an estimated 52,000 Palm Beach County residents were left uninsured. How do we address the coverage gap between Medicaid and the ADA so that our residents, I think that we meant ACA, so that our residents have access to adequate health care services, ADA? Yeah,
that's a great question. And I'll tell you that it's a much more complicated thing. And so I know your statistics, 52,000, but you have to understand that if you expanded Medicaid, there was a group of people from 130 to 137% of poverty level who were eligible for full subsidies in the exchange, which was private insurance. If you expanded, you took that whole swath of people and forced them onto Medicaid. And that's how the plan was to pay for all of that growth, is the states would bear that 40% cost of the Medicaid. So when we didn't expand, what we did is we allowed a significant portion of those people to get full subsidies in the exchange with private insurance. The real question moving forward is what kind of plan do you have in place, or what's the idea to have a plan in place that allows people to get real coverage? And what we've been pushing in the House, so we've had, and by the way, Medicaid is a significant portion of our budget. At some points it grew almost as high as 15% or greater every year, just eating up our budget, things that would go to education or to other social net services. And so what we did, and I wasn't there, but the state did, is they moved from a fee-for-service system where you just walked into a physician's office, they charged you something, it got sent to the state, and it got reimbursed, and it was very expensive. So then they moved to a managed care model where they said, let's have companies with skin in the game manage these folks' health care with an actuarial sound policy that the state looks at, all the proper requirements, and you give them a fixed rate given who the Medicaid population is that they're taking care of. And that has slowed down the growth. We don't see those huge 12% up in growth rates, but we're still right teetering at it. Where we need to go next, which is what we've done in part in education, is allow the consumer to control those dollars. If we could draw down those dollars and create a consumer-driven model, a patient-centered model that said to the patient and created, there's great things that are in the ACA. The concept of an exchange is a great idea, where just like it's no different than Apple having a platform where any innovator can go there and throw an app up on there and succeed or fail based on whether it's a good package. We should have that same thing. That's the exchange. It's a platform where any willing provider can go on there and offer whatever amalgamation of services to the consumer and the patient-driven person, knowing that that patient has this pocket of money to go in there and purchase. And if we do that, we'll have an exponential reduction in the cost of those services because it's fully competitive. Do you know what the most competitive prices are in our healthcare system today? And they also have the lowest incidences of malpractice and the lowest incidences of disease or infection are our free market sectors. You can open up your paper and you can get eyeglasses or an eye exam for inexpensive costs. And I know this is an awkward one, but plastic surgery, which is done all over the place, is one of the most competitive, least expensive, high-quality outcomes of any of our current practices because they're completely free market. If you allow that to happen with the patients by giving them those dollars to make those decisions with real catch-alls, you have to have this much in preventative, you have to have, from this bucket of services, you have to have this much in overall insurance for catastrophic care, then I think you're going to see those prices drop. The second thing we need to do is get out of the regulation business. So right now, we have a law in the books that says that if you want to have a surgery, you in essence have to have it in a hospital. It's the most expensive, the most likely place to get incidences of sepsis than any other place. So a basic knee reconstruction surgery, you can get it done in an ambulatory surgical center for maybe $5,000 to $10,000. In a hospital, it's $20,000 to $30,000. If we just said that you can have surgeries and have a certain recovery care period in an ambulatory surgical center, you will absolutely drop. The estimation nationwide is somewhere in the ballpark of $2 to $4 billion back into the healthcare industry for people to get more services and more care. Again, what will ultimately give people the lowest cost, the greatest access, and the greatest outcomes is a free market system. Let the patients, let those people who are in need control those dollars, not a managed care company.
Last question. What one very important issue is supported by the House, the Senate, and the governor?
I think there's a Mother's Day resolution. I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to pass in the first week of session a death penalty bill that restores the death penalty in Florida. We've got 400 inmates on death row, I think, and the penalty, we've revised it a couple of times. Of how many people on the jury had to vote to get a death penalty, but I, for one, believe that a death penalty is an important deterrent, and I think that is shared by the House and the governor as well.
I think it's a great question, and it's an indictment on the process, is what I was saying earlier. The reality is, even not just the Senate Republicans, the House Republicans, and the governor, who's also a Republican, it's even with the Democrats. And talk to our colleagues here. They'll all tell you 85% is generally agreed to. Most of what we passed in the legislature In the House are votes of 110 to, a smattering of opposition, because we have 120 members, 120 to 0. Overwhelmingly, same in the Senate. Most of what they pass is they have 40 members. It's 35 to 5 or 39, 40, 0. Most of what we do, we agree on. And most of what we get done this session will be close to unanimous votes. It's just that 5% and how we handle it, and it's our fault. I mean, we ought to be better at it. But we get embroiled in these brouhahas, and that's all that's written about. But the reality is we get along very, very well. I can tell you, I know Senator Latvala and his counterpart in the House get together every week. I talk to the Senate President every week. Right after this, I'm going for a 2-hour walk and a picnic with the governor in the park. All right, that was not true. That part was exaggerated. But the reality is we do get along, and I think you can sense that it's genuine friendships, and we spend a lot of time together. We're in the trenches, but we need to do a better job of communicating what it is we believe, and do it in a way and in a manner that's, as I said earlier, honoring to the people of the state. It's been an honor to be before you. Thank you so very much.
All of the news articles that you read about how much we fight up there, that's all fake news.
Gentlemen, just want to thank you on behalf of the Forum Club, and best wishes for the next 60-plus days. Our state is in your hands. We'll see everybody here back on March 13th for Secretary Gutierrez.